What? Land 200 tons on Minmus? That's right up my alley. Let's go! Hello everybody and welcome. You're all dying to know, is Kerbal Space Program 2 finally playable? Is this the update that turns things around for the bug-ridden early access game we got in February? Well, it's complicated. When this video goes public, version 0.20 called For Science, the first content update for Kerbal Space Program 2 has just been released. And yes, I've already played it for almost a week now, thanks to a preview build that I was provided with by the developers. There's a lot to talk about because I want to give you as many details as I can for you to make your own decision whether or not KSP2 is now worth your money or, more importantly, worth investing the time to play the game in its current state. We will go over the new features and game mechanics, we will go over the new content that has been integrated into the game, and at the end I will give you my verdict, what I think about For Science. But this isn't a commercial, I will also show you the sides of the game that you won't find in the publisher's PR materials. So strap in, grab a beverage of your choice or maybe some popcorn and come with me into the brand new scientific world of KSP2. There's going to be a lot more content coming in the next days and weeks, so make sure you're subscribed for what's coming down the line. First, let's talk about one of the main gripes everyone had with the game up until now: Wobbly Rockets. Let me just show you a comparison. This massive Joule 5 ship was wobbling like crazy despite a gratuitous use of struts when I launched it back in version 0.14. Now with version 0.20, it flies straight as an arrow. Yes, there's a little bit of flex, but it is a far cry from what I had to endure previously. And I haven't had to use any struts with simpler vehicles like this Duna lander. Remember this rocket I dubbed the Polo? Creative director Nate Simpson included it in his presentation of For Science at the Space Creator Day back in October because it was a good example of a sensible rocket experiencing unduly wobbling. This is how it behaves now, without any changes to before. So, how did they do it? Once you start up the game and enter the settings, you will discover a new section called Physics Joints. By default, the game is set to the new Enhanced Joints system and the mode set to Heaviest. If you're familiar with KSP1, this is basically auto-strut for all parts involved in your rocket builds. You can switch back to the multi-joint system, which makes it behave like before. Me? I definitely know which I will go with going forward. Speaking of going forward, let's talk about the new progression system, which leads right to the science of For Science. Yes, we now have a reason to explore the solar system because there's science to bring back from every celestial body. When you start a new game, you will be presented with the choice of sandbox or exploration. When you select the latter, you will have to perform experiments and gather science points or do some missions and get even more science points, which you then in turn can use to unlock the new tech tree. And yes, I have crunched the numbers. You will need 1010 points to unlock Tier 1, 11,170 points to unlock Tier 2, 42,900 points to unlock Tier 3, and 97,000 points to unlock everything so far in Tier 4. In total, a bit over 152,000 points to unlock everything available at this point in time. But if you look at Tier 4, you can see a few empty spaces. These will be filled with new parts when the Colony and Interstellar updates are available sometime next year. There's really a whole lot going on here with science in KSP2 because there are quite a few differences from how it worked in the original. That's why I'm going to do a deep dive video into this later this week. That subscription really is going to pay off for you. Also, if you are a channel member or support me over on Patreon, you will get that video earlier than the general public. But here's a brief summary. You slap science parts onto your vehicles, and once you reach a new environment where the experiment can be performed, this icon on the left starts to flash. By pressing it, the experiment gets conducted and you can see how many points it yields. But you can't use them yet unless you transmit the results or return the samples back home. The latter will always give you more points than if you just transmit the data. Some parts perform the same experiments, some work only in very specific circumstances, so you don't have and definitely should not need to travel with every science part all the time. But there are different requirements for each, so you will have to plan differently. I have tried to wrap my head around doing a Joule 5 mission with the new science equipment, but I haven't yet found a good solution. But that's a good problem to have. As I said, a lot to talk about here, so please make sure you watch my KSP2 science deep dive later this week. This video is just a general overview of the version 0.20 update, and it's long enough as it is. I just mentioned planning, and that leads me to my next item, which is one of my favorite things in 4 Science. New delta V and thrust indicators. Do you like numbers? If the answer is no, well, too bad, because you should like at least 2 of them, delta V and thrust to weight ratio. Both are now available in the staging interface on the right-hand side of your screen, in the vehicle assembly building, as well as during flight. And this makes a big difference. Why? Because now you can define which stage is meant for which planet or moon. You can check if your launcher has enough thrust to lift off of Kerbin, and you can check if your lander is beefy enough to touch down on the Moon or Yuna without your Kerbal becoming a green skid mark on the surface. Maybe even more importantly, you can now see if your thrust-to-weight ratio is above 1 when landing. That's important because with that information you can really pinpoint your landings. Like here, where I visited the Monarch as part of a mission I grabbed from Mission Control. It's not perfect though. If you mix solid rocket motors with liquid fuel engines on the same stage, the thrust number will be incorrect when you throttle the liquid engine to 0. But we're going to talk about bugs and other issues in another item later. I mentioned the Monarch and missions, so I guess this is the perfect time to talk about missions and discovery. With 4 Science, we not only get access to the research and development building, but also to mission control. In here, Carrie Kerman, apparently a coffee addict, provides us with mission briefings. The first couple of missions are easy, like launch a rocket. Later ones are a lot harder, like land 10 Kerbals on Eve and return them. In general, missions are a good way to boost your science point budget because you don't have to go looking for new things to experiment on. Instead, you receive a clear goal and have to execute on it. Well, kinda clear. There's for instance a mission that requires you to have 4 wheels on your vehicle, but apparently the wheels on landing gear does not count. Bummer. The missions also guide you to interesting locations in the solar system. If you have watched previous videos after 4 Science was announced, I have already mentioned discoverables. These are special landmarks scattered across each celestial body. Finding them is not only a nice experience, they also generate a lot of science points. One of the first you will find is Cappy Rock, a nod to Capybara Space Program, an April Fool's joke the developers had played on everyone. Another is Stargazer Point, which you can also see in the recent video published on the official KSP YouTube channel. And there are going to be a lot more, there's apparently dozens of them. I'm not going to spoil the locations, you can go find all of them for yourself. Or probably 12 hours after the update is live, people will have already discovered them all and published them in the forums, so be aware of spoilers in the coming days. Speaking of spoilers, back when KSP2 initially came out, I went and did a tour of all the Easter eggs available back then. If you don't want to know anything about that and discover it all for yourself, skip ahead to the next chapter. Because if you play the main missions, the game will send you directly to them. One of your first missions will be the Monarch, then to another monument on Minmus, then to the one on Yuna, and then to Tidal. It is pretty clear that you have embarked on some kind of quest to discover other sentient races and the true origins of Kerbal kind. On my exploration save, I have yet to find out what we will learn on Tidal. Duna was the farthest I have come until now. At least with crew on board, because I don't want them to die in a fiery death. Which is a perfect segue for re-entry heat. Yes, Kerbal Space Program 2 finally got a thermal management system. Now you need to be careful when coming back from your trips to outer space because things are going to get toasty when you re-enter the atmosphere. It's hot and shiny. And I can't decide whether or not I like the visual effect. Sometimes they look great, at other points there are some weird artifacts. Also, when you ascend too quickly, you can see that every part creates its own little flame element, so to speak, which looks a little bit weird. But overall, it's great to see this finally present in the game. Coming from visuals to functionality, let's talk about how heat now works in KSP2. Simply put, if you move through an atmosphere too fast, things are gonna heat up quickly. Parts that overheat are marked with a thermometer-style heat gauge. The higher the bar, the more in danger you are. Well, the part actually, not you personally, but part failure can lead to vehicle failure, so you need to be careful with that. It introduces new challenges to missions and spacecraft design and is another way to keep players more engaged. However, I've encountered some weird phenomena. Here are a couple of the things that just don't make sense to me. Maybe somebody more versed in real-world rocketry can help me unpack this in the comments. Multiple times, parts started to get toasty high up in the atmosphere. In this case, it started exactly after stage separation and the part heating up was inside a fairing. Looks like those fairings either don't help or we have a bug at our hands. Another time, a part started to heat up and stayed heated for a long time, as if there was no other thermal mass around it to dissipate the heat. And then there was this instance where I wanted to do an air-braking maneuver at Eve. Yes, I know, Eve is brutal, and rightly so, but I specifically built this vehicle in such a way that everything should have been protected by a heat shield in the front. All parts attached were at most the same diameter as the heat shield. Yet, one decoupler way down the stack, past 10 or 15 parts in between, started to overheat and then explode, destroying the craft in the process. I asked the developers and apparently they are hunting down an issue where some decouplers will overheat despite being occluded by a heat shield. What speaks for my situation being an instance of this bug is that when I detached just the rover delivery portion and brutally punched it through Eve's atmosphere, there was nothing. No red heat gauge anywhere. Sure, that orbit did have a lot less energy than interplanetary re-entry, but this is Eve, the planet with the densest atmosphere aside from the gas giant Joule, and I was coming in not tangentially, but head-on. From my point of view, there are three possibilities. First, I am stupid. I have no idea how anything works and I should be ashamed of myself. Second, the game does not show me in a well-understood way how the heat system works. Why do things heat up at comparatively low speeds in the upper atmosphere? Why do parts down the stack heat up while everything directly behind the heat shield is fine? Third, the heat system is either not well balanced or buggy. Thanks to the reply from the developers, we know that the third one is at least in part true. But what do you think is going on here? Tell me in the comments below or over on my Discord server, link is in the description. This might now be the best time to keep talking about the deficiencies of KSP2 for science. For bugs! Yes, there are still bugs in the game. A lot. Many of them have been in there since day one, some have been introduced with later updates, some have returned after being fixed previously. But before you all go gloom and doom, keep in mind that my experience over the past few days will not be your experience, since I had a preview version of For Science to try out and some of the issues I encountered might already be fixed in the build released to the public. One can hope. An issue that returned is the orbital decay bug. It was reintroduced in version 0.15. Apparently, it's fine if you stay above certain altitudes on every celestial body, but I hope they can squash it once and for all at one point. A new science bug happens when you plant a flag, and while the Kerbal performs that action, you want to let him do a science experiment. It will result in the Kerbal not being able to move. Another science bug concerns the surface sample arm. It's basically unusable when you want to put it on any other position aside from exactly how they placed it for the For Science preview video, which is how I did it for my Eve rover, and then it worked fine. We talked about Wobbly Rockets being fixed in the beginning. Well, I encountered a situation where some parts appeared to completely ignore the new joint reinforcement. Then all the issues I had with re-entry heating. The couplers can be wonky, especially stack separators. I had a vehicle with an XL separator and hitting the stage button would not separate it. I had to right-click and manually release the separator, which then resulted in it shooting up into my vessel. Not very nice. When I returned from my 200 tons to Minmus mission, a part of the vehicle refused to separate until I time warped. But then the orbit lines had gone. And sometimes parts of the rocket appear like they want to escape. I could go on for a while, but there's still more to go. Overall, I have reported almost 30 bugs to the developers over the course of the week I was playing around with KSP2 for Science. But to be fair, the majority of those I have reported are minor issues or things that can be resolved with loading a previous save game or restarting the game. One big thing I haven't tried yet, though, was multiple docking maneuvers in orbit. At least I was able to help Anth a little bit in reliably reproducing the dreaded and elusive trajectories disappear bug. They're now one step closer to getting that one fixed. Something that did definitely improve, though, is something we need to talk about in my next item. Performance! Yes, I remember the day the minimum specs for KSP2 were announced and the rage it had caused in the community. I did an entire video about that back then. You can watch that by clicking on the top icon or in the video description. But since version 0.10, the initial early access build, there have been a lot of improvements. Many of them have already been implemented with version 0.15 back in October, but For Science also has a couple of things to make the game run smoother. Let's take my Joule 5 monstrosity again. On the left is footage from when I launched it 2 months ago in version 0.14. On the right is footage from last week in version 0.20. I have time-aligned both engine ignitions and you can see them go on from there. Both clips are sped up 10 times because builds like this still cause the game to come to a crawl. I was getting 3 frames per second with the one on the right. Still, it felt a lot smoother because frame times were more consistent. And it was also a lot faster overall. While I was already in the upper atmosphere in version 0.20, the other one had barely cleared the cloud layer. But again, I need to stress this. This is my personal experience. I'm not a professional tech channel that does performance comparisons and can dive deep into the intricacies of frame generation. What counts for me is whether or not the game performs in a way that enables me to control it reliably so that I can get to orbit without pulling all of my hair out. If you want to see some official numbers, the developers have posted some charts on the forums and did a write-up on some of the things they did to make things better. I'll link to that in the description as well. This video is getting long already, but before we come to a close, I want to do a lightning round of highlights. Boats and cheats. One of the experiments introduced in For Science is the U-Dunk-It, a crude part that you have to submerge in order for it to generate points. For it to really work, the developers have improved the buoyancy in KSP2, and they made the boat dock at the Space Center a lot prettier. Now I can't stop singing, "We all live in a Kerbal submarine, Kerbal submarine, Kerbal submarine." Oh, that's a lie, I can in fact stop. Another thing is the return of the cheat menu. Press Alt and F8 and you will be greeted with this little thing. With it, you can either cheat your way into filling up the tech tree, or you can teleport your vehicle to wherever you want. Just be careful when you teleport the vehicle still attached to a launch clamp. It will bring that clamp with it. Thanks to the new atmosphere graphics, courtesy of BlackRack, the game looks more stunning than ever. I especially enjoy sunrises at the Space Center now. And that trip to Cappy Rock makes me want to visit more places on Kerbin when I find the time to do so. Alright, you've waited long enough. Here's now my verdict. To make it very brief, overall, I am happy with how For Science has turned out. Is the game now flawless? No. I mean, look at the bugs I talked about. But is it a lot better than before? That's an emphatic yes. I would even go further. With this update, Kerbal Space Program 2 is now finally a proper game. The progression with the tech tree and the quest to grab science from all available environments finally gives players some goals to work towards. Over the past few days, I've landed 200 tons on Minmus with barely tier 2 unlocked. I took a detour to discover the Monarch and stranded Jab in orbit around the moon in the process. I rescued Jab from the moon. I did a flyby of 3 of Jules' moons. I discovered new Kerbal lore and I put a rover on Eve. I had fun with this. For the first time with KSP2, I didn't open it up to have something to create content from. I played it because I genuinely had a hard time putting it down. Yes, at the core of it, the game is still just a modern take on the original, with a few differences, especially in the way how science works. But that's not a bad thing. And there is more content coming with colonies and Interstellar. Yes, you will encounter bugs. Many of them. Some of them annoying. But in the many hours I have spent with 4 Science, I never encountered one that I couldn't work around. If you're one of the many players that tried Kerbal Space Program 2 out back when it came out as early access in February and you stopped playing immediately because of the state it was in, I suggest you give it another chance. Quality-wise, it doesn't hold up to KSP1, there are still too many issues. But we are now at a point where I believe that the positives of KSP2 will outweigh the negatives for most players. Back when I first reviewed KSP2, I called it a diamond in the rough. It's not the Koh-i-Noor yet, there is still a lot of rough edges the developers need to cut away from it, but you can already see it beginning to shine and sparkle. If you have picked it up again now after this update, please drop a comment below and let me know what you think, especially when comparing it to the first release. Me? I need to plan my Joule 5 mission. Now, how best to drop the diving bell into Val's ice ocean? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.